Hey guys, welcome back to another episode. I am so excited. I have not had a guest on in a while, and Mackenzie, our wonderful Mackenzie, actually suggested that I interview my sourdough friend, whom I actually met in Madrid at what I think it was the car show. And I tasted a piece of the bread, and I've always been interested in sourdough.
The Labor Day parade.
Yes, there it was. And I was so nervous to try it because I just like didn't know if I had the time or the patience, which Nina's been there for every step of the way. I'm going to start out by going over a little bit like what is sourdough, what are its benefits, that kind of thing, and then Nina's going to answer all of like the getting started questions and all that good stuff, which is going to be so good. So, all about sourdough. So why is this like a trend right now? I feel like everybody sees everybody doing sourdough, right? It feels like it's trendy. But it's really been around for a really, really, really long time. And I think that it's more on the forefront of people's minds right now because health is on the forefront of people's minds right now and is a healthier option for so many people. It's more cost effective for so many people. It's less ingredients than the majority of store-bought breads, which is amazing. As we all know, minimal ingredients is so important when we put things together. There's a sense of pride for a lot of people to be able to create something that's great for their family to consume. And there's actually a natural fermentation process with it. So it's actually gut healthy too. I shared a reel about sourdough and its benefits a while back in the group. But what it really does is microbes are actually killed during the baking process, but their cell walls and their fragment pieces are still very much a part of the bread when you consume it. And that is what's going to actually help as far as like what they call the ghost pre and probiotic, which can positively affect and influence our immune system and our gut health. So if we can get ourselves and our families and all of that onto the sourdough train, we're all going to feel a lot better, which is really the whole goal of my business profile is to help you feel better. So I figured, why not have Nita come on because she's been the one that's helped me through it all and she can break it down for us. So Nina, go ahead and introduce yourself. Why'd you start sourdough? Where'd you come from? And tell us about you.
Perfect. Thanks, Nikki. So, hi everyone. I'm Nina, and I started this little sourdough business last year in April. Really, I just wanted to get involved in my local community and make something that I can kind of offer to my community. So, I started a farmer's market stand, and it's really kind of taken off. But I mean, I've been making bread, gosh, for like 10 years now, and I started with like yeast. And so that's been my thing. We did like weekly pizza nights and like breads, but it just always left me feeling really bloated and heavy, and I never really felt good after it. Excuse me. And then last in 2023, a neighbor introduced me to sourdough. She gave me a sourdough starter, gave me some vague instructions, and I went through like 20 pounds of flour before I kind of like figured out, made a first good batch of sourdough bread. And it like totally changed my life. I didn't feel bloated after, it was just such a beautiful process. And like I got to make it for my family, like Nikki, like you mentioned, and I was just hooked. And so that I kind of, that I turned into like a farmer's market stand here in Madrid, Iowa. And I just started, the demand was just so high. Like everyone wants something locally made with low ingredients. Like sourdough has flour, water, and salt, and that's it. There's no preservatives, there's no toxic ingredients, there's nothing in there. And it's locally made and it's fresh bread versus something that you get at the grocery store that has 20 plus ingredients that was probably sitting on the shelf for weeks at a time and probably won't go bad for another couple of months. Like that's not real food. And so just this passion for healing. Um, I do have a background in biomedical engineering, so I've always been involved with like healing, right? Once I kind of think it's like the you start sourdough and then you start kind of asking questions of like, well, where is my beef coming from? Where are these vegetables coming from? Like, where are these crackers? Like, how are these made? What's in here? Like, it really kind of starts getting you into this rabbit hole of like really assessing everything that you're putting into your body and everything that you're offering your family. So anyways, there was like a huge demand for the bread, for like wellness and wanting to get healthier and learn. And last year I started doing sourdough classes, which has been a hit too, and just really teaching people how to do it themselves has just been really rewarding for me and for just to kind of grow this journey of like everyone getting healthier. So, anyways, hopefully that was a good introduction.
Yeah, absolutely. I did not know what your background was in. It makes so much sense now. It's funny. I went over, Nina did like a special class for me because I couldn't make it to her Saturday classes because she's amazing. And we discovered that we actually grew up like a couple of towns apart. We actually probably played each other in sports, different ages. But either way, it's just crazy how we all end up in these places. Um, and I love,
Well,
oh, I know, it's crazy. Um, I love the passion that you have behind it and the reasoning for all of it. So I think the biggest burning question, and you tell me, is like the best suggestions for someone that's just starting out with sourdough or it's like their first time trying it. Like, what are the tools they need? What are the ingredients they need? What are your best suggestions? Give it to us.
yeah. Sure. So I recommend just getting a starter from like a neighbor or someone that you know that's doing sourdough. You can definitely make it yourself, but I don't recommend it for newbies because it's such a long process and you can get discouraged by just making your own starter before you actually even start making bread. So my recommendation, go find someone that has starter. If you're local, I sell starter kits with my starter that's active. But just go get yourself a starter and just go, just start. I think the one of the biggest mistakes is people just get really overwhelmed by it, right? Because it is simple, but it's not easy, right? And there's a lot of technicalities behind it. Like I totally appreciate it coming from an engineering background, but it's not necessary, right? It's really just a couple simple steps, three simple ingredients, and just go. Just like get your hands dirty, just try. You'll figure it out as you get along. But as far as tools, what you're gonna need. I'm actually in my sourdough factory, so I'll kind of show you guys what I use. You don't need a lot of things to get started. You can get more fancier as you kind of get along, but you don't need like all the fancy things. Um, as far as ingredients, you're gonna need flour. I use this one from Costco because it's readily available and it's organic. It's a good price and it's really clean. Like if you're looking at your flour, just make sure you're reading the ingredients because sometimes there's more than just flour when you're buying flour. So just something to look for. But yeah, the green one is what I get at Costco. It is all purpose, but it's basically bread flour. So that's what I would recommend. Um, my starter. This is one of the jars I have. I fed it a couple hours ago and it's not done growing yet, but it's almost doubling in size. So you're gonna need a starter. You're gonna need some salt. Um, I use pink rock salt because I like the color pink. Again, it's a Kirkland Costco, readily available for anyone really. And water. Water, I recommend getting filtered water, whether it's from a Brita or like a fancy filter, just something that's not coming from your tap water. Here in Iowa, our tap water is not the greatest and it'll kill any of the live bacteria that you have in your starter. So, flour, water, salt. That's it. As far as utensils, I mean, you can see I'm like prepping for my stuff tomorrow. Really just like a bowl or some bins. Um, there is a fancy Danish whisk that you can use that like makes it a lot more enjoyable, but you can do it with your hands also when you're mixing. This is really helpful, like a bench scraper, just to kind of as you're folding dough. Again, not necessary, but it's $10, so it's great. And a bread length. This is required. This I definitely is required. It's basically what you use to score the bread before you bake it. And it just kind of opens up the bread a little bit so that it can rise when it was baking in the oven. And then I do recommend measuring out your ingredients for newbies. So like a food measure, food scale is great. And the only reason I say that is because I did not start off like that. And it just took me so much longer to kind of get my recipe down and learn how to scale it when I could have just started with the measurements and writing things down. I would have learned a lot faster. So, um, and then the other thing you're going to need is a basket. So I've got two different versions here. I've got one of these Benetton baskets. They're a little pricier, but they last a long time and they hold its structure really well. Otherwise, you can get some affordable ones also on Amazon. So I think that's all you really need to get started. Not a lot of things.
I think the other one that I was caught off guard with was the Dutch oven for the bake.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, so a Dutch oven. So for making, so Dutch ovens are great. So if you don't already have one in your house, you should definitely get one because you can do like stews, casseroles, soups in there. I basically do all my cooking in them anyways. But they're big cast iron, like Dutch ovens with a topper on it. And you basically do one bread per Dutch oven and you bake it for about 40 minutes and then you take the top off in the last 10, 15 minutes of it to really get the crisp top.
Yeah.
So that's another thing that you need. If you don't already have it, you should probably add it to your kitchen anyways.
Yeah. See, I didn't have that and I was like, and Amazon, here we go. I was like, what are these?
Yep, exactly.
Actually, I didn't. It's a Danish whisk. Okay, so that actually came in the kit that I ordered from Amazon for my sourdough beginner kit. I never touched it because I have a clue what it was until I came home. So, seriously, what she said makes sense because when I got started, I was so confused. I even started with one of Anita's starters and I still managed to screw it up. I got a second one and it's going much better now. But when she says filtered water, I definitely agree. We have like good rural water now, but it's definitely still not as clean as you would want to do this with. So I simply just like measure out on the food scale how many grams of water I need to match my starter when I go to mix it. I know you'll touch on that. And then I just pop it in the microwave because it's not warm by any means because it's in the fridge. So I pop in the microwave for a little bit and it warms it up enough to put it into the mix. So like little things like that are super helpful. Um, as far as like terms to define, I think that one's really helpful too because if you get into like these sourdough Facebook groups, which if you get into that, I would suggest one. Don't do like 12 because it's craziness. But defining some terms, I wrote down some. I know you probably know of more, but
Mhm.
discard starter, define.
Yeah, sure, sure. So this is a probably one of the more complex things to really kind of understand and get your mind around. So I'll just kind of explain what a starter is. So this is my starter right now. It's really just flour and water. That's it. So it's really just flour and water that's been fermenting for a while. And if you kind of mix it together, it kind of starts bubbling and it starts growing. That's the natural yeast. That's the natural wild bacteria. So that's what makes your bread rise. Like that's the healthy stuff that like makes your gut really like nice and clean. And so a great analogy, like I came from baking with yeast. So basically if you're familiar with like baking with yeast, you take like those yeast packets and you put them in water and the water kind of like fuzzes. That's the same thing that the starter is. It takes a lot longer because it's not fake, it's real. So basically what you want to do is you want to take a start. Like this is so much. You do not need this much. I'm doing this because I'm making 30 loaves for tomorrow. But you basically start off with a little bit of so this morning I started off with like a fourth of this full of starter. Then I added equal parts water and flour, and it came up to this line here. I have the scrunchie, and I just mixed it together. Mixed it really nice, and then let it go. Let it go on my countertop, and then it started to rise. Um, you brought up temperature earlier, so I'm just going to mention it now. Temperature is so key for sourdough because it really depends on the temperature. Now that it's cold and it's freezing and it's like 10 degrees outside here in Iowa, you really need to be careful with like keeping it in a warm place, like by your stovetop or like on a heating blanket because it really loves heat. Heat will make things go faster. So I've kept this right by my stovetop. And so if you do equal parts flour, water, and starter, it'll take about 4 to 6 hours at room temperature to rise to double in size. And the starter will kind of rise at its peak. And once it gets to a peak, it'll slowly fall. That's what you have to know. It like peaks and then it falls. So when you feed it, it'll peak. And at its peak, that's when you want to use it inside of recipes that requires rise. Um, and if you don't use it, which sometimes that doesn't it happens, it'll just fall back down, but you're going to have twice as much starter as what you started with, right? Because you fed it. So then you're going to have a half jar full of starter. Now you can't add equal parts flour, water, starter because then it's going to overfill and then there's not going to be any room for the starter to grow. So you're going to need to discard some of it. So that's where the term discard comes from because you just want to be efficient with your use of resources. Otherwise, you're going to be going through 10 pounds of flour every week for just feeding your starter. Um, Now, starter is great for flavor. So you can use the sourdough discard for like tortillas, for cookies. Really, you can just add it into like any of your favorite recipes to kind of give it that extra flavor and texture. But if you really want something to rise, like pizza dough or bread, you're gonna want to wait for the starter to get to its peak before you use it. So I think that's like one of the hardest part is like timing everything. So you really kind of have to figure out what schedule works for you and then work backwards to find like a schedule, like a plan that works for you for making sourdough bread.
Yeah, exactly. And so like with the
What do you
schedule,
think?
yeah, no, absolutely. Like with the schedule, I would totally agree. Because after you start to mix things together, which we'll go over here in a minute, um, you have to be ready to like babysit it for the next 6 to 8 hours on and off, and sometimes longer if it's colder, which
Hmm.
I put mine on a heating pad to make it happy. But typically what I do, because I work from home, works great. I typically feed the starter in the morning if I'm wanting to prep dough, and then come like lunchtime-ish is when it's usually about at that like happiness point, and then I start the process of mixing the dough, and then I tend to it over the next 6 to 8, put it in the fridge overnight kind of thing to proof. But with all that, I think the next important term is like BF or bulk fermentation. I didn't even know it was called BF until I got into these Facebook groups, but that is what that means. But go ahead and explain bulk fermentation because this is where I still screw it up every time.
Yeah, so bulk fermentation is really that it's really when you're making bread in bulk. So, let me just kind of explain the process. I've got like a little guide here. I think you mentioned your process a little bit of how to make sourdough, and then it'll kind of make sense. So, like we said, the first thing you want to do is feed your starter. And when it gets to its peak, that's when you want to mix all of your ingredients, your flour, water, and salt, and your starter. And you mix those together. And then once they're mixed, you want to wait about 30 to 60 minutes and do some stretch and folds, being very gentle with the dough. And then you want to wait another 30 minutes, do another stretch and folds. You want to wait, do like a total of 4 rounds of stretch and folds. And then you want to leave it. You want to leave that puppy, leave it on the countertop in a warm place for it to finish fermenting, for it to really kind of build its structure and kind of do its thing. That I think is what we're talking about, like the proofing, right? And that's really just for like all the gluten to like decompose and all like the bread to kind of form with all like the natural wild bacteria. That's really what we mean is just kind of let it do its thing. You really needed to give it its time. And it really depends on the temperature. So if it's warm, it's going to go fast. If it's cold outside, it's going to take longer. Also, fun fact, if you're doing multiple breads at the same time, like if you have a big bowl and you're trying to do 3 at a time, or like me, you're doing 10 at a time, it's going to go faster than if you're just doing one at a time. So the whole bulk fermentation, it's like if you're doing bulk, it's going to speed things up a little bit.
Okay. Okay. Oh, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah. I'll
Okay.
just stop there.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So I think something that is hard to understand is to know when it's done doing that bulk fermentation and not overproof it, because you want it to about double in size, right? But you don't want it to go above that. And they say it should easily fall out of the bowl, which has never been the case for me. Do you suggest like oiling the bowl at all or the container? I know I've seen that other places. I've never heard you bring that up to me before. But how do you judge when it's time to pour it out and do the next step?
It's this is the hardest part. And honestly, like I don't give like a fast rule of like this is exactly when it's ready. I think it'll just take some time for you to kind of figure it out yourself. You're gonna have to learn how to fail a little bit. Like your first loaf is not gonna be perfect. Your fifth loaf may be great, but you're always gonna find ways to improve. So I would just say try something. I mean, if you're going through the process, it's gonna turn out. You just have to fine tune it. The rule of thumb that I like to do is like around like 6 to 8 hours. That's really where I'm like checking it. You don't want it to be too sticky. And then also if you like take a little piece of dough out and put it in some water, it should float. And if it sinks, that means it's not ready. But if it floats, that means it's probably ready. So if you're taking the dough out when it's not done, it'll be kind of stiff. It just won't like grow. It won't rise as much. But if you let it go too far, it'll like overproof, where it just means it'll lose its structure. So it's kind of like this fine medium where you kind of have to figure out what works, but you're just gonna have to figure it out. Like I do the water test. That's like my easiest, but it really depends on temperature outside. Like in the summertime, my farmers market season, it takes like 5 hours for me to do like 10. But in the wintertime, gosh, I've waited over 12 hours. So as like a perfectionist type A person who loves schedules and loves like a regimen, sourdough's gonna throw all that out the window. So it's good to just kind of practice just like listening to what the sourdoughs tell you. So you just have to kind of be aware and just like look out for just kind of learn. And I don't know. That's just my take on it without getting too technical is just do it, try it, see what works and kind of modify for the next time.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have had like beautiful loaves, like oh that crumb on the other one that I sent you a video of, like it was so good. But then I've had other loaves where it's like dense and flat. Like okay, clearly I did something wrong on that one. Um, so I think that's helpful. Um, as far as hydration, so if you're reading sourdough
Mhm.
recipes, you'll hear a lot of people mention like 100% hydration and that kind of thing. And I messaged Nina last week. I'm like, what the heck does this mean? I don't understand. How do I know if I've hydrated it too much? What do I do? Can you just like kind of give your take on what hydration level means?
Yeah. Yeah. Hydration really just means how much water is in the loaf in the dough. And it'll vary depending on what kind of flour you're using. Like whole wheat flour is very different from like the flour like the one that I showed you. It's very different than gluten-free flour. So it's just kind of a way to normalize the recipes across the different types of flours that you're using. Um and like professional bakers, they like to use like grams and like versus like cups and flours because it's not as the cups is not really as accurate as actually measuring it per grams. So hydration is really the percentage of your flour to water
Okay.
or your water to flour. So for my recipe, I do for one loaf of 875 grams, it's 335 grams of water to 460 grams of flour. That's 72% hydration. 72% hydration is probably about average for like classic sourdough bread with like classic organic white flour bread or bread flour. Um, Anything like below like 50 to 60% hydration is low hydration. That just means your bread's going to be super, super dense. But it's going to be really easy to work with, right? Because your hands won't get very sticky. But if you're going to like above 80% hydration, it's going to be so difficult to work with. It's just going to stick all over the place, Nikki. I think one of your last loaves, it was just very sticky. I think it was just probably extra water got in there, is my guess. But your crumb may look very airy and it's probably going to be a very lighter loaf,
Mhm.
right? So again, it's just something to play around with. Around 70, 72 is pretty, it's kind of like where I do mine. It's just like very classic sourdough with classic bread, organic white flour. Um, and then it kind of varies throughout all the different flours that you can use. But it's just a really simple ratio. Again, it's just more people trying to complicate things, in my opinion.
Yes, I agree completely. That's why I said if you're going to join a group, join one and don't read all the comments. That's just too much.
Yeah.
Um, Never read the comments. Like I agree with that. So like if it says like in that recipe, right, 100% hydration, that probably just means that you need to add more water and it should be more of like a thinner consistency when you're originally mixing it together. I would
Yeah, you're gonna want to shoot for like 72% of like water to flour.
okay. Okay. And that
That's
just
it.
right after when you fed it and it's at its peak, and that's when you go ahead and use it, correct?
Yeah, when you're mixing all your ingredients, right? Like how much water are you using and how much flour are you using?
Okay, perfect. That actually
Mhm.
helps me a lot right now, so thank you for that.
Yeah,
Uh,
the
okay,
recipe that I gave you is 72%. So that's kind of like about average for white bread.
perfect. And I'm going to get the flour that you use today, and I'm going to try
Perfect.
that one so that way I know exactly that it's matching what you do. Because Nina's loaves of bread are, oh my God, good. My family, with the first set that
Yeah.
I was trying to make, they like stopped kind of eating it after a while because it can get like that sour bite to it if you don't do it right. Whereas like Nina's bread never has that sour taste to it. And I brought home after the class, Nina sent me home with some bread, and my family ate it in like a minute. I'm like, clearly it's me. I started over and it's been so much better. So just like she said, you're gonna fail a little bit. It's okay. Um, the other one, like define word, proofing. I think it's helpful to understand like counterproofing versus cold proofing and what they mean, what they do.
Yeah. So I was going over the steps of the sourdough making process. So we kind of stopped at like when you finish proofing on like on the countertop, right? You just kind of give it like 6 to 8 hours ish, depending on the temperature outside. And then you like take it out and you can shape it into a little pretty either a square or a little oval or a little circle, whatever you like, and put it into a basket. And then you could throw it in the fridge to cold proof overnight, and that just helps finish the ferment process. So like ferments even longer and the gluten breaks down even more without kind of overproofing it. And I like to put mine in the refrigerator at about 35, 36 degrees because if you go over like 41 degrees, it's going to continue proofing and it's going to get big and it's just going to get flat when you bake it.
Yeah.
Um so yeah, did that answer it?
No, it did, definitely. And I think I have a question because so sometimes when I put it in the fridge, and you can keep it in the fridge for 6 to 36 hours, I think is what your thing says. If I leave it in there for like more than 24, there's like that harder crust on top. I know you told me not to cover it when I put it in the fridge to proof. Should I get that? They talk about like those shower caps to put over the top of it. What's your take on that?
You can if you want to go the extra mile, but like I think that crust is actually a good thing because that hard like kind of dried out crust is actually the bottom of the loaf. When you flip it out and you put it into the Dutch oven, and that bottom, if it's a little bit hard or dried out, it'll prevent the bottom from burning, which
Ah,
is really key for Dutch ovens. So I think it's totally fine. Like if you want to make three at a time, like they're good in the fridge for like up to 3 days.
perfect.
So I say don't worry about it.
Okay. And that's what I've been doing. And I was like, I gotta ask Nina this question. I'm gonna save it for the podcast so that we can just answer everybody's question. Um, so that's perfect. I'm gonna remove that from my Amazon cart. Um, okay. Let's see. Do you have anything else that you think needs to have defining terms?
No, I
Okay,
don't think so.
perfect. Okay, so biggest mistakes that you maybe see people make, like Nikki's sourdough journey the first time. Like, go ahead and cover what you think the biggest mistakes or misunderstandings are.
I mean, I think I covered this the starter. I think that's just like a really difficult one to understand if you're just explaining it. I think you just kind of have to see it. I think you just have to wait, watch it rise, watch it fall, just kind of practice before you can kind of get the hang of it. But in general, I think the biggest mistake is people just give up too soon, right? Like sourdoughs, it's very, very, very simple, but it's not the easiest things to get right away. But once you get the hang of it, I mean, it's a lifelong skill that you have for the rest of your life. And I was mentioning, like, I've been making bread for over 10 years, and it took me weeks and like 20 pounds of flour, like in the garbage before I like got one good loaf. So don't give up. Like continue trying, continue experimenting, have some fun with it. Like you mentioned, like there's so many Facebook groups, there's so many like ratios and things to keep in mind. Like as a starter, like throw it all out the window. Like you're just getting started. It's way too intimidating to like think about it all. It's a very simple process. Just kind of start, make some mistakes, iterate, even keep a little journal, like write some things down on like what worked, what didn't, do some fun experiments, make some fun art on top of like your design, like just have some fun with it, like enjoy yourself with it. It's going to take some time, but I often see people like make one loaf, get discouraged because they're perfectionists, which you're in great company, and then give up, right? And it's I just encourage people to keep trying, right? And I've got some classes, so if you're local, like come on over to a class, like we have some fun. We kind of go over it. You get your hands into every single step of the process so you can kind of feel for yourself like what does proof dough feel like versus what do the stretch and folds are supposed to look like, or how are you supposed to use like a bread lame and score your bread, and you get to kind of do it all so you can go home with a little bit of confidence. But that's like my biggest thing that I saw, which I'm trying to get people into it a little bit more and not such an intimidating way.
Yeah, and I have to say, like, you make it much less intimidating. Like, after I left that day, I was there for what, an hour and 15 minutes. I felt so much better about things. Like, I'm like, okay, now I know what things are actually supposed to look like. Now I know that I can like stretch and fold this way versus that way. It's
Mhm.
not a one size fits all, and I think that that is really important to understand. Like, you don't have to, just like with healthy lifestyles, you don't need to be all in or all out. It doesn't have to be picture perfect. Your loaves are going to turn out different every time, and majority of the time they're going to turn out well enough to enjoy, and then the next time you get to try again and try and do it better or tweak something or try something else. I think it's
Yeah.
hilarious. You'll get a kick out of this. My daughter takes sourdough to like to school almost every single day, and she has a friend that steals like a part of her loaf every single day. She has like this bake sale thing that they're doing in their class. They call it businesses next week, and she's like, "Can we make a sourdough loaf and I'll sell quote unquote
Oh my
half
gosh.
slices?" And I'm like, "Yep, we'll do it." So,
That's
it's
awesome.
it's
Love
so
that.
and you can make anything out of this stuff. Like, I'm preparing to do a big batch of discard waffles, but I'm going to include a protein in it. And then you can freeze the waffles after you've made and cooled them, and the kids can just pop those in the toaster. And that's a heck of a lot cleaner option
Amazing.
and easy for them to do, right? There's no reason not to do these things. That makes so much sense. I'm also going to try my hand at some tortillas this weekend. We'll see how it goes. But it doesn't have to be
Awesome.
hard. You can be fun with it. Um, let's see. I think that was like the majority of the biggest questions. Were there other things that you wanted to chat on? I know that you had texted me a few of them. Um,
Yeah, I think another thing I'll just mention briefly is there's so many techniques. Like sourdough is thousands and thousands of years old. Like there's so many different techniques to do stretch and folds. There's so many ways to shape a loaf. There's so many different methods. I teach a very simple technique. There are so many different ways to do it. So like I start with a really, really, really simple way. And then you guys can take it and like run with it and like add in different techniques and like learn. Like if you like my favorite part is like shaping the dough. So I always like love finding like new ways to shape loaves and like seeing what the final product looks like. So that's just like one thing to keep in mind is like there's just so much information out there because there's no wrong way to do this.
mhm. I love
So just
that.
something to keep in mind.
Yeah, there's no wrong way. And then you get to like the level of inclusions where you start throwing stuff in there. I haven't done that yet. I've tried yours and they're great, but you can do anything with these things, which is super cool. Um, so I think like the biggest piece to take away from this point is, are you shipping loaves at this point or not?
Um, yes. Nikki, you've
Ish.
encouraged me to do shipping, so I've tested out a couple loaves. I've got shipping boxes, my website's updated, I've got a system, I've got another shipment going out on Monday, so I am starting the process. So if you've got customers that are interested, I do bake them in literally it like out of my oven and then I package them and bring them to UPS. And so you get them fresh. It's a 2-day shipping, so it's still fresh when you get it. And you can either choose to freeze the loaves so you can like have them for later on the week or in 2 weeks from then, or you can refresh the loaf, which is my favorite hack of sourdough because you can only do this with sourdough. Um, So refreshing a loaf is really when you have like a stale loaf, um, when it gets hard, you can just run it under some water and throw it back into a hot oven for like 10, 15 minutes. And it'll come back super crispy on the outside and super soft on the inside. And it's just the best way to preserve the freshness without adding preservatives and toxic materials, toxic ingredients. And you can only do that with sourdough because there's only flour, water, and salt. So my shipping process is I'll ship it to you. You'll get it by in 2 days, and then you have a choice. You can either refresh it and enjoy it super fresh, so just like it came out of my oven, or you can freeze it and save it for another day. So they ships fresh. It's never frozen. So yeah, if you guys are interested, we can share the link with you guys, and you can order some fresh sourdough.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad that you're doing it. I'm so proud of you.
Thanks.
So I love that piece. So I have a lot of people that are not local. I have a lot of people that are local. So go ahead and like describe a couple of the things, like if you're local to you in Des Moines area, right, is what you consider local.
Yep.
If you're in the Des Moines, Iowa area, what are some of the things that people can order from you?
Yeah, so I do have a website, so you can basically order all the different sourdough breads, bread bowls with all the different inclusions. I have a pepper parmesan loaf, which makes excellent croutons. I have a cinnamon raisin that's really popular right now for like the winter season. Jalapeno cheddar is really popular in the summertime. And then obviously a classic loaf. I have pizza doughs on there also. I sell those frozen. But you can order anything and you can pick them up in the Madrid store. So right now I'm only in one location because it's my community, and about 80% of my customers right now live in Madrid. And so we have one grocery store right in the center of town, and I drop off fresh goods Mondays, Thursdays, and Saturdays at noon. And so I just drop off anywhere between 20 and 30 loaves plus some custom orders. And so that's like the best way to get your hands on it if you're local. And yeah, and I also do sourdough classes out of my factory here, also in Madrid, and those are almost every other Saturdays and on Saturdays from 1 to 2:30. It's just a fun way to spend an afternoon. I get a lot of husband and wife couples. I get a lot of like mother daughters and best friends come along. So it's just a fun way to learn a new skill, have some fun, and walk out with some fresh bread and some goodies.
I love that. You can also purchase Nina's starter still,
Oh
right?
yeah, yeah. I
Okay.
do sell a starter kit. So I sell a starter kit, which actually comes with my guide. It's again really simple step-by-step guide. I just really break it down to like the most simplest form possible. And we go over this in like all the details in my class, but you kind of walk away. I sell the starter kit, which you get starter, some instructions, and then my guide also.
Love it. Love it. It's so awesome, you guys. Like if you're local, like sign up, go get the starter, order some stuff from her. Like seriously, I'm so glad that I did and my family's in love with it too. And I just love being able to provide it for them. I think the last question I have, which is always an important thing, which I have learned, what is your starter's name?
Mine is, or her name is Marla. And so Marla is special to me because I've got backyard chickens. Actually, when we bought this property, it came with some backyard chickens. And then last spring, I raised 15 backyard chickens. And like the mother hen right now, her name is Marla. And she's just like the most beautiful chicken. She's like all gray. And I just love her. And so I'm like, you know what? She's like always walking around like this factory. So I'm always like seeing her when I'm like making sourdough. So I named her after my favorite chicken.
I love So it's important to name your sourdough. So if you're going to keep a starter, you gotta name it. I named mine Shirley. I don't really know why. It reminded me of someone old school that seemed like a good time. So just named her.
It's just another fun way to like keep this fun and light without adding like all the calculations and complexities and instructions to it.
Yes. Oh, I love it. Well, we'll put your Instagram handle below as well as your website and all of that so people can reach right out to you. And
Perfect.
so glad that you joined me today. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Nikki.
All right, I'll talk to you soon. Bye, Nina.
See you.